I'm going to have Adam join us here, and we can get going. And hi, everybody. I'm Joe Moore, co-founder, CEO at Psychedelics Today. Very excited today to talk about microdosing with Jim Fadiman and Adam Bramlage from Flow State Micro. And if you haven't read Jim's psychedelic book, the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, you have to. It's we were just chatting about that. It's my #1 most recommended book out of all psychedelic books. There we go.
There we go.
All right, fantastic. So Adam is here now too. So Adam Bramlage, co-founder at or founder at Flow State Micro, long time interest in psychedelics and cannabis. And we also have Dr. Jim Fadiman, who was at the table when they established transpersonal psychology, which I'm eternally grateful for. So thank you, Jim.
Happy
And
to do that.
yeah, and we're here to talk about microdosing today, which is I think probably one of both of your favorite topics. Yes. And can't wait to dig in. So Adam, do you have an idea of where you wanted to start?
Yeah, I just want to start with kind of the basics and the modern history a little bit. I know that there is a long indigenous history. We'll talk about more of that at length in the class, but I think it's kind of a funny story how it kind of started. Jim, do you want to just tell the short story of how you got involved in microdosing?
Well, like most important major scientific breakthroughs, inadvertence, mistakes, doing things wrong, misunderstandings. I had a lunch with Bob Fort, wonderful being who talked about Albert Hofmann, who used very low doses. And Albert said, you know, if Sandoz had really researched this bottom area, we wouldn't have ever had Ritalin. So, and I thought to myself, that's nice. And I'm going to finish my lunch and I don't care because I have spent 50 years looking at high doses and that's all that matters. And the universe looked down at me and said, you just made a mistake, buddy. And so I ended up discovering that very tiny doses, people liked them. And I asked a number of psychonaut friends who were pretty happy to try anything, would you try a low dose, this tiny dose of like 10 micrograms? And they all looked at me like, you know, sure. And they all came back and said, hey, that was really nice. And a number of them said, you know, it lasted 2 days. And that was our first breakthrough. And from that point on, it's been expanding ever since.
And it's amazing too, because it's been expanding through citizen science, which is, you know, not double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials by any means, but it's citizens becoming their own scientists and trying out what works and then sharing that data with you to start.
Well, one of the things we all forget is science is not something that, you know, came down with Moses. Science, the whole idea that a scientist is different from you and me is a very modern notion. And they've developed their own religion and their own beliefs and their own kind of limitations. However, us, the rest of us, and I also can be a scientist when I absolutely have to, what we keep doing is telling each other stuff. Telling each other this happened to me and this interested me and this restaurant has a fantastic dessert and this person is interesting and oh, and I took part of a mushroom and I realized that my headaches were less. Citizen science is discovery and sharing. Research, remember, research is we already know something and we're now going to test for that. That's later on in the system. And microdosing simply is kept way ahead of the research people. And what's nice is they're now racing to catch up and there's some really nice research happening.
That's amazing. And when I interviewed Jim for the masterclass, you know, I talk at length about zoopharmacognosy, which is the idea that animals self-medicate and that humans may have learned from animals which plants to use. And when I was interviewing Jim, he mentioned, you know, early man, like early animals, were originally citizen scientists, right? Somebody had to test that mushroom to see if it healed you or if it killed you, right? And so, you know, long before science of today, there was citizen science, there was trying things and checking it out. So that is super exciting. Thanks for sharing that, Jim. And Jim, the idea with your protocol. We'll dive more of that deeply into that in the masterclass, but what was the general idea behind that?
Well, once again, everybody got it wrong. I was trying to find out what happens, So what you need, if you're asking people what happens, you want them to have it happen, once in a while, not once. If you're asking people, do you like this bourbon? You want them to taste it more than once. So when I found out that people who were microdosing said, it lasted 2 days, I thought, well, the third day you come back to base. So the fourth day you would have the experience again, and then you would notice something and you would tell me. So I developed what's called a protocol, which is a classy word for schedule, that you take it on day 1. It's still working with you on day 2, and you're coming back down on day 3. And then day 4, you take it again. Inadvertently, I handled the problem of tolerance, which is every protocol now has spaces in it, so that people don't kind of use up their psychedelic capacity. And what happened is I got all that information, and it's wonderful. But after about 10 cycles, people were saying, well, my third day is pretty good too. And what we began to see is, unlike most pharmaceuticals work for X hours, and then whatever they do for you goes away. Microdosing seems to be building, not building itself within the body. You're not accumulating, mushroom, but what you are is accumulating benefits, so that people benefit from when they are benefiting in a pretty regular way. And they tend to retain the benefits because it's their own body that's improving. It isn't that the drug kind of carries you.
Thank you. We're going to spend the next probably 45 minutes moving forward with taking questions from the audience. So if people want to start entering questions into the chat, and we'll start building a question list, or if Joe, you have a question list, we can get started on that as well. So if people want to start adding in the chat, any question you have for Dr. Fadiman or myself, and we'd also love to hear where you're from. Please add from the chat where you're listening from today. Maybe add if you have microdosed before, if you're not, share a little information with us about yourselves in the chat. Before we get into questions, last question I'm going to ask you, Jim, just in case there's anyone on the chat in the webinar that's brand new to this. And I know that we talked about it the other day, and we go over definition quite often, and there's certain words that are better than others. How would you define microdosing for an absolute beginner novice who was here today?
It's a small enough dose of a psychedelic, predominantly for most people, either mushrooms or LSD or things that are close to them, that is below the threshold of psychedelic experiences and psychedelic kind of excitement. So it's almost a negative definition, is there's no visions. The heavens don't open up and say, we're glad you're back, you divine being. Anacondas don't eat you. That's something that happens in ayahuasca. But you instead, what happens is most people say, I'm doing better. I'm feeling healthier. I'm feeling maybe smarter. Very often people say, I'm nicer. And they say, I'm even nice to people I'm not usually nice to. So what we're seeing is microdosing stabilizes and improves equilibrium in the system. Now that's a small statement. High dose psychedelics, blow your mind off and you're never the same again. That's not what we're talking about here. So if you're a genuine beginner, whatever that means, meaning you only been yourself for your whole life, and we're saying this might help parts of yourself that are not in equilibrium. That's all we're saying.
And I know in the past that subperceptual was the word. We're maybe not using subperceptual as a word now. We were talking the other day about subhallucinogenic, and I've heard Paul Stamets use subsensorium. Do you think there's a range of words? It could be any one of those?
Well, as long as you know what you're talking about, it doesn't much matter. I think something in Alice in Wonderland says a word means exactly what I choose it to mean. I actually am taking the word sub-threshold from Wikipedia. That's its definition. I thought, whoa, that's so neutral. And also, if you kind of think about it, it doesn't say what the threshold is about, but it says if you've taken too much, you would notice. And that is one of the defining trips about microdosing is if you've taken a little bit too much, you say, whoa, this feels like I've taken a little bit too much.
That's a great point. And I like to say that anxiety can also be an indicator when you're microdosing, right? That feeling of, whoa, I'm anxious, or I've taken too much, or am I coming onto a large dose trip? That's definitely an indication to lower the dose down, for sure. Okay, so we've got some amazing questions coming in already. So Jim, we're going to start with this one.
Okay.
The individual is saying, luckily I have the option to microdose LSD or psilocybin. Which molecule is optimal for this experience? I'm guessing for the microdosing experience.
Yeah, I'm assuming, well, all I can tell you is what a few thousand people think. I'm not sure that there's enough difference to matter, but the notion is that psilocybin containing mushrooms are more emotionally stabilizing and more heart opening. And that LSD, being a synthetic, is more analytic and kind of more mental. Now, that's, as I think the opinion came from this guy in Los Angeles who said, well, I have a lot of friends, and after you take these substances often for 6 or 8 months, you begin to distinguish. For most people, the question is, what do I have available? And what we know is psilocybin and LSD overlap so much that it's not a worrisome distinction. So it's a kind of classy question.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I'd like to say I've seen LSD be used more as as something to get things done. Maybe you're writing for long hours or you're coding for long hours. It's something that's more of an external experience. Whereas I know in my own personal microdosing experience, it's more of an interpersonal, more of an inside type experience. So luckily you have the option for both LSD and psilocybin, which means you should be a citizen scientist and you should try both. And then you should journal about it and you should see which one does this for you and which one does that for you. So I'd have to say the best way for you to figure this out would be for you to take that experience yourself.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and pretend I'm a lawyer real quick. So everybody, these things aren't yet legal in the United States. So this is all at your own risk. And please do your best and probably talk to a lawyer if you're concerned.
Right. And that no one who is listening to this program should consider that any of us have any possible interest in your taking any kind of psychedelic ever.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we are not medical doctors, and this is definitely not medical advice. And
that's right. Now, I got to tell you the distinction.
You're
when
good at this.
As Dr. Fadiman, it kind of unnerves me because sometimes there are real doctors in the audience. When I worked at the Veterans Hospital, the patients explained to me that an MD is someone who can give you drugs. And I said, well, what's a PhD? They said, piled higher and deeper. I have never found a clearer explanation of the problem of my education.
I've had PhDs give me drugs too. But maybe let's not do comedy hour, but it would be really fun. So a question further on that last one. So typically when we say psilocybin, we mean whole mushroom, Psilocybin cubensis, typically. Is there psilocybin isolate versus LSD? Is that the same largely? We don't want to like muddy the water there.
We don't know. All of the research that you've read over the past like 10 years, when it says psilocybin, they're talking about synthetic psilocybin without the entourage, without the other alkaloids that are in the mushroom. So in a crazy way, we don't know. And we don't know whether, and nobody has done a study at the, at the double-blind level between LSD and psilocybin because they're fairly sure they wouldn't be able to measure it.
Jim, are you familiar? Do you know Sue Sicily?
Between synthetic, which you can't get anyway, and mushrooms. And it looks like from some research that was done in Japan, not surprisingly on rats, rats preferred the natural and showed improved whatever they were measuring more with natural psilocybin than with synthetic. And so there's not a lot of evidence out there. And as I say, synthetic psilocybin is not available to all of us.
Yeah, it's a specialty product for sure. So Sue Sicily, a researcher in Arizona who runs the Scottsdale Research Institute, has an appropriate DEA license to be doing whole mushroom research in humans. So expect data from an American source soon. I'm sure there's others doing more right now too. So I can't wait.
And she's wonderful because she fought with the government. And they said, no, we'll give you a license to use psilocybin, only synthetic. And she said, no. And they said, well, why not, lady? You know, it's hard to get a license out of us. And she said, because I'm not willing to use synthetics on human beings. And I admire her courage because she was really quite often at the edge of, they'd saying, well, just go away because we, the government, love synthetics because we can measure them accurately. Now, if you're a human being, accurate measurement up to a certain kind of minimal point is necessary. You want to know what's a little and what's a lot. But the difference between 1/100th of a microgram or a 20th of a milligram usually isn't the deciding factor.
Yeah, dosing with whole mushroom is pretty easy. And dosing with LSD, if you just have a big pile of powder, a little complicated. We don't have that kind of gear usually. All right, so next question, all right. From Brooklyn. How could we apply the protocol, Jim, your protocol, for seasonal affective disorder?
Oh, the people I know, I forgot about that. This lovely guy who was he's a school teacher not in Brooklyn, but nearby. And he had very serious seasonal affective disorder, which I love because it's called SAD. And it's when there's less light and less light and less light, and you feel basically depressed. He microdosed as he would microdose for anything else, and he indicated that it was very useful and that every season now he will microdose as he's first feeling the depression of seasonal affective disorder. So in other words, it should be treated as any other condition that people microdose for. But thank you for bringing it up, because I'm actually trying to keep a list of things that we're talking about for some writing I'm doing, and I'd forgotten about SAD. The other way, by the way, that people handle SAD is they sit in front of a very bright light, and there are ones you buy designed for SAD, and you literally sit in front of a bright light for 15 to 20 minutes a day, and your system says, oh, that's enough light. That's almost like the real light of summer, spring, and fall. There it is. And it looks kind of like that. That was not supposed to be an info commercial, by the way.
Yeah, we didn't mention any brands. I have no idea what that is.
And let me answer this a different way for Heidi, because I'm reading this question a different way, because Jim's protocol is 1 day on, 2 days off. And sometimes for people with depression, they can't really afford those 2 days off in a row. So there are other protocols that might work better for you during this period of seasonal effectiveness disorder. One specific protocol was developed because people with depression were doing the Fadiman protocol and they felt like they needed to dose on that second day off. And that's called the Microdosing Institute protocol. And that's essentially day on, day off. So that would be one way. Another way would be to switch to the Stamets protocol, which would be 5 days on, 2 days off, or 4 days on, 3 days off. You would effectively be dosing more often, which may help you potentially with the seasonal affective disorder. So those might be the other options to the Fadiman protocol.
Thanks. Right, and that's the other part of that question, which is right. The protocol is designed for whatever it's designed for, and it's popular. Every other day is also terribly useful, And very often people who start with every other day then extend out to a Fadiman protocol. 5 days on and 2 days off, 4 days on, 3 days off. Again, that's a matter of finding what works best for you.
And less is really more. You know, if you're a healthy normal, as it's called, you probably don't need 5 days on, 2 days off. You're probably better off with the Fadiman protocol. And what I found personally with the Fadiman protocol, and which James has heard out in the world, is the second day off can be better than the day on and the first day off. So we have to remember that with microdosing and psychedelics, there is an afterglow, and these days off are really great and effective as well. Awesome. Moving on, will this masterclass be online? This is a masterclass online. It is all pre-recorded. You own it for a lifetime. You can watch it at your own speed. You can watch it 1,000 times, but the full class launches November 15th. Currently, if you sign up for the early bird ticket, you get access to one 30-minute talk by Dr. Connor Murphy to hold you over in the meantime. So that's the basics on the online course. I'll answer that. Jim, are there any recommendations on microdosing for those who have suffered from multiple concussions?
Oh my. Oh, yeah.
I try to get 2 a year, but need to stop.
Okay, you mean concussions or yeah, you got to just stop hitting people so they don't hit you back. Let's be serious. The problem with a concussion is that part of the brain physically is damaged. And the problem with therapies for traumatic brain injury, as it's called, is that they don't really know how to get the brain back to its healed state. And so what we found, and there's a whole company called Wisana that's based on working with traumatized people, athletes, people in car accidents, people in physical fights, and so forth. And what they're finding, that microdosing over time creates new and better neurons. And that literally, and Adam can speak to this from some of his clients, his coaching clients, that they have a return of normal functioning rather than the workarounds that are very wonderful and sophisticated for people with brain injuries, but they don't repair the brain. We are always making new cells. Microdosing, this is stuff done in the lab where you can literally watch the neurons, and the neurons that get the psilocybin bath literally grow larger, have more dendrites, more communication capacities, and are healthier. And it looks like between the improvement in the brain physically and the improvement in the whole system from normal microdosing behavior, people get better. Now, Adam, you really need to talk to this because you know these people.
Well, yeah, I work with a lot of people, former athletes and people, you know, formerly of the NFL, currently of the NHL, formerly of the NHL. And, you know, it's important to realize that when we're talking about this, again, this is citizen science. These are anecdotal reports. These are people sharing their personal story. You know, this is backed by citizen science, not clinical science. So be aware of that. But we're finding that small and large doses of psilocybin has been effective for people with TBI and concussions. And the combination of lion's mane and stacking that with psilocybin when you're microdosing also seems to be effective, as studies of lion's mane in rats have shown that it creates neurogenesis and improves neuroplasticity. So what Wisana and Daniel Carcillo and these groups are talking about is they believe it's a combination of the large dose, what they call a loading dose, and then a microdose, what they call a maintenance dose. So they believe that it's a combination of both, and that the brain that has been damaged and concussed needs a combination of both. And I'm not a doctor, but I think that they're onto something. So that's what we're seeing. I'm seeing personally with the people that I work with that the microdosing is helping to clean up their brain fog. It's helping to clean up maybe any anxiety or depression that might come with TBI. It's helping them in their home life, and it's also helping them in performance. But again, these are anecdotal stories. These are professional athletes.
Wait. Let's stop that. No, okay. Anecdotes are not anecdote is this word like saying, well, it's just a crappy little story. Now, here's the difference, okay? You're in a research study for depression, and you've got the doctors and the nurses and you've begged to get in, and you've taken dozens of psychological tests, and they give you psychedelics, and they say, how's your depression? And you say, it's better. And they say, that's science. Now, if you then go out and meet someone and say, I was in this research study, blah, blah, he says, yeah, I've been microdosing too. And, my depression's better. Which data point, we mustn't denigrate the truth of our own experience with the word anecdote. I just call it a report, because that's what it is. And yes, it isn't as measured on the back end. But the point, when you're depressed, the question is, do you feel better? Not have you improved on the depression score, 1 point. There's an important thing, and someone said this is a maxim in the statistics world, which is, unless the difference makes a difference, it's not a difference. So what we're seeing, and why is microdosing popular? And it was very popular before there was any research, and the research is kind of mixed. Some research says, well, nothing happened. And another research says, oh, it seems to be what everyone says it is. So we're at a curious cusp point where we are learning from each other. And if one person says, this is interesting, you get interested. If two people say, this helped me, you're more interested. If people from 16 different countries who've never met each other say, this helped me in the same way, that's citizen science. It's also called survey research. And I've noticed when I do a survey, it's anecdotes. When John Hopkins does a survey, it's science.
I almost wanted to make a snarky comment. I'm going to hold it in. So
I didn't.
Is that briefly kind of a repeat question? What works better for anxiety and depression, LSD or mushrooms? You got to try for yourself if you're willing to take that kind of risk. There's no clear data yet, so stand by. There are some amazing trials underway right now, and we're going to have so much more data in a year. So stay tuned. But the next substantial question here. Yeah, so this one could be exciting for us. And it looks like, some people have some ideas here about psychiatry is such a tricky topic. So, Jim, at one point you had a line in
oh dear,
Microgram series.
Yeah.
And this seems like a really safe line to me. About 80% of microdosers report it lifts their depression differently than an antidepressant. And why wouldn't it? It's such a very different drug.
Oh no. Well, the difference though is fascinating. Antidepressants, which even the manufacturers say they don't work for maybe 30% of people, but when you are on an antidepressant, and a number of you who are listening know exactly what I mean, you are less sad. Negative things happen and you are not as disturbed by them. Now, what people say when they don't like their antidepressant, they say, yeah, I feel less sad, but I feel generally numb. That's the negative. What happens with microdosing? I was just actually looking at a slide that we showed years ago in England, and we only used our sample of English and Irish people in our sample. What happens when you microdose for depression, for the 80% or so who report benefit, not the other 20%, is you are less sad, just like with an SSRI, but you are more glad, that you are more happy, that you are more kind, that you are more compassionate, that you are more excited, that you have more energy. These are all the positives. And so you have more positives and less negatives. And that's simply a different portrait. It's not at all saying anything about SSRIs. It's, as I think you said it very nicely, it's a different substance and it affects you differently.
Right. And apparently this gentleman over at Hopkins, Fred Barrett, had a statement saying this comment was a serious point of concern. To me, like SSRI, the risk profile for microdosing psychedelics to SSRIs, it's not even in the same category. That's my opinion of the matter, but we need clinical literature to support that. And from my perspective, the performance of SSRIs is atrocious, but this is a microdosing talk. We don't need to go down the SSRI rabbit hole. I do that on the podcast all the time anyway. But like, have you had a chat with anybody at Hopkins about this kind of thing?
Well, again, there have been a couple of, well, the studies on depression, the people in the studies are what are called treatment resistant, which means whatever they'd been given before didn't work. Okay, that's all that means. It doesn't mean they were resisting anything. They wanted to get better. That's the group that has an 80% improvement. If you just took your run-of-the-mill people who take SSRIs and are successful, you'd probably have, it would be probably better. But people don't come to microdosing for depression unless usually something else hasn't worked. So
right.
We're not comparing, but we're saying that this, and the other thing is the safety profile, which is what you were talking about. Safety profile of psychedelics is almost frighteningly good. There's a fantastic study of someone who found a few people who'd overdosed on LSD. Now, when I say overdosed, I think there's 3 people in that study. One is 5 times the dose. This is not a microdose, 5 times a high dose, like 100 times a high dose, and like several thousand times a high dose. Okay. The 2 higher ones went into a kind of coma, a kind of I'm not around for a couple of days. And they recovered with, according to their own reports, 0 damage. And they had long-term mental conditions which were alleviated, which went away after the super high dose. Now, nobody is recommending super high doses, but it's the safety profile that I'm looking at. And I look at everything probably with a kind of risk-reward ratio. Skydiving, risk-reward ratio looks kind of little too much for me. Lying on the sand in Kauai, risk-reward ratio is better. So microdosing has so far extremely low risk and a pretty good track record of being helpful in a number of ways. So that's a serious concern which needs to be looked at. The psychedelics are very low risk. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get stupid. Driving into a tree is not the fault of a psychedelic. It's the fault that someone said to you, wait a moment, you really shouldn't drive yet. And we really don't have, and it's hard to say this because it sounds unrealistic, we don't have any deaths from psychedelics. We do have people who have died and they've had psychedelics in their system, along with, fentanyl and cocaine and all kinds of stuff. So that's just a safety issue. And it's such a relief to be working at the safe microdose level where you can say to someone, well, you have brain damage. Have you considered microdosing because it's not going to harm you?
Mm-hmm. And a point of clarity, there's many thousands of psychedelics now. I'm sure some weird things have happened with some of them. We're particularly focusing on LSD and psilocybin here in this conversation.
Right. Yeah, the exotics are basically, we don't know enough.
Right. And some people are microdosing some of these, some aren't. Stay safe out there, everybody. Next question here is a good one from David. Is there a good research base for microdosing studies generally? Like, where can people go? I know Dr. Torsten Passey's book, The Science of Microdosing Psychedelics, which is a good historical review.
Yep.
But he doesn't have the same optimistic conclusion you do, because I don't think he was privy to the new data that you were able to, or maybe he didn't accept it in the same way.
Well, actually, I'm just looking for it because I have the book right around me here and I've been using it recently. Here, just so here, he's a wonderful human being. He's a personal friend. I'm acknowledged for helping him with the manuscript. And it's very skeptical that there's any effects. However, he reports all the effects that he can find, which included, as I just noticed, a lot of quotes from my papers. So he's basically, as many people are coming from the high dose world, it's a little hard to know what you're measuring. You know, when someone says, I feel better, that's not much of a measurement. But we all know when we say it, we know what we mean.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have like a favorite website you send anybody to read up on, you know, current studies or anything that's going on in the field?
There's a study done by Vince Polito where he looked at what he said the 40 best microdosing studies. And I thought, wow, a year ago, he would have said the best 3, one of which would have been his. And the problem with microdosing studies is they tend to measure healthy normals, most of them who've had psychedelic experience, and many of which have already microdosed. So there isn't much room for improvement. The depression studies that were and one of the studies that found very little said, you know, we really should use people that are depressed if we're measuring depression scores. So there isn't a place to send you. I would have sent you to a site called microdosingpsychedelics.org because Sophia Korb, my research pal for many years, and I built it, but it recently was destroyed by the waves of evil that stalk the internet. And so at the moment we're rebuilding it. The Microdosing Institute in the Netherlands is probably the best resource for a whole lot of very easy to get information. They use great graphics. Their work is legal. They have about 5,000 cases, and they know a lot. My other person that I go to when I have a real question is I go to Adam, and he usually knows more than I do because he's working with people.
And I just want to say that we go into the depth on every microdosing study that we could find that's been done to date in the masterclass. So we'll touch on Beckley Institute and their cold presser LSD microdosing test that had some amazing findings. Dr. Connor Murray does a 30-minute presentation on his LSD microdosing test that he did at the University of Chicago. We'll talk about Paul Stamets' Microdose Me, Quantified Citizen, microdosing, self-guided research. We'll talk about David Aredizzoni and the placebo studies. So we'll talk about all of these in depth in the class, and you'll have to check it out there. What I will say is it is limited compared to the large dose, but I think as Jim said, currently there are, you know, a few dozen studies right now, or at least 2 dozen regarding microdosing.
Yeah, and they're good. And they're good people doing them. And, you know, people are trying to find out what they can, and they're using the tools they know, and they tend to be interested in what they were interested in before with other substances. So microdosing, as was pointed out by Joe early on, microdosing is not taken every day. It doesn't fit the classic pharmacological model. The research often ignores that. It also is effective over time. And the research, usually because it's very expensive, doesn't do that. It says we're giving, you know, we're going to give people a microdose. They're going to come in, they're going to sit down, they're going to have microdose, they're going to have 4 hours of psychological tests during the time when we know they're quote high, and then they will go home. And then we'll say, well, not much happened. Yeah, it's kind of like if you were saying we're going to measure the effectiveness of a 3-course meal, take 2 bites, and now we're going to do all the measurements. It's not wrong, but it doesn't give you much. It doesn't give you the kind of useful data that we as human beings want. And it's true, Adam is going to cover it, and he's covering actually, he mentioned almost all the best research there is. So you'll get it.
Awesome. So we have 30 plus open questions and less than a half an hour left. So we're going to try and move really quick on the answers for these future questions so that we can touch everybody's question. I apologize if we don't dive too deep into these. Next question, do you have a particular strain of psilocybin you like? I know that different mushrooms produce different effects. I have lupus and I'm trying this for pain and inflammation. I'll just answer that really quickly, that the most stable and easy varieties of psilocybin to begin with are Golden Teacher, Thai, and Burma. You want to stay away from a penis envy, an albino penis envy, anything with the name penis in it or related to the penis envy, or azaresins or cyanescence, or any strain that is super potent is not specific to microdosing. So the safest place for you to start with lupus, I believe, and I'm not a doctor, would probably be something like Golden Teacher, a Thai, or a Burmese variety. And then do you always use Cubensis? I think they're saying the Psilocybe variety. Yes, and there are also people that use Amanita muscaria. We'll talk about that in the class as well. In further
strain question real quick. That's, again, if anybody didn't pick that up, it's just about ease of growing.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. So then I'll go now to what is the ideal microdose pattern, how much and how often? There really is no ideal pattern. One size does not fit all for microdosing. That's why it's so important to learn more in this class and in these type of Q&As, is it's unique to everybody. So while we can suggest dosages and give you ranges, you really have to try it out for yourself.
Here's the axiom. Go slow, start low, take time off. In there, you work out what's the correct dose for you at the time for what you want.
And Jim brings up an important thing. Start low and go slow, right? If you've never done psychedelics before and you've got mushrooms, probably 50 milligrams is a safer place to start than 100. And with psychedelics, much like an edible, you can always take more, but you can never take less. So don't be impatient. When you're taking the 50 milligrams, give yourself an hour or two for it to really kick in before you take the next 50. So really start low, go slow. You have to try it out for yourself. I hope you get a chance to join the class and you can get really more in-depth look at all the different things that are unique to the individual. Do you find, Jim, that microdosing prior to macrodose is beneficial in allowing for less resistance with macrodose experience in working with clients with PTSD?
Maybe. Since I think microdosing tends to reduce anxiety and improve depression, a lot of people I know have said, gee, after I microdosed and my symptoms went away, I was just less interested in a high dose. A high dose is a different universe. Think of it as the AM and the FM dials. They're all radio, but boy, is there different information on each. And you don't want to, starting with a microdose is the chance of anything happening that's a problem, very small. Starting with a high dose, there's a lot of possible issues that you may not want to run into.
Awesome.
There could be another thing here about lowering. By experimenting with microdosing, you're kind of becoming familiar with these things a little bit, even though it's a different planet.
Yeah,
that could also lower anxiety too. Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, no, in the same way that I see when people go and take a large dose of psilocybin for the first time, maybe the facilitator will give them a smaller dose to introduce them before they give them the mind-blowing dose. So yeah, microdosing is a great way to introduce people to psychedelics without having the psychedelic effect. I mean, Laura Guzman said on your podcast something that was so special when you asked her, what do you think about taking the bad trip out of psychedelics or taking the risky experience? And she said, well, that's what microdosing is. It's taking the scary parts out of the potential large dose psychedelic journey. So moving on to, do you want to say something, Jim?
Oh, no, I think we're just saying, yes, that's probably a problem. That's a good idea to do that. That's what we're saying. We just said it in about 7 different ways.
Awesome. Hello from New York. For someone that has had high dose experiences and want to try microdosing to continue supporting the changes that started opening through these experiences, what would a good dosage protocol be to start with?
The same as someone who has never microdosed. You start low, go slow, And just because you've had the problem with people who've had a lot of experiences is they imagine that a microdose is like a little bitty high experience. It's not. It's its own experience. Just imagine it's not a psychedelic. It's a mysterious something from a country that we don't know the name of, and you got some. You don't say, well, is that like LSD? And they say, we have no idea. So the fact that you've had high doses means that you know how to work with your consciousness, and you may be able to benefit in ways that people who have less experience won't.
That's great. Thank you. What is the range of a subthreshold dose for Cubensis? Thanks. Tripped way back in the old days, Lori from Boston. Thanks, Lori. I think just quickly, we don't know what your subthreshold dose is. It's different for everyone. So even though you've had experience back in the day, the safest way is to start low and go slow. With dried mushrooms, again, 50 milligrams is probably one of the safest places to start.
And somebody on Reddit asked, hey, I'm finding that 1/10 of a gram is too much. Does anyone else have that problem? And that's 1/10 of a gram is about as low as anyone starts. And so I'm waiting, and the next day there's, as usual, 12 or 15 responses, all people who said, I use less than that. I use 1/5 of that. I use 1/10 of that. So we don't know how little it actually takes. And let me give you a number, because I love this. I just love to do this. How many molecules are there in a microgram, a millionth of a gram of LSD? Okay. You know, if we're playing the game here, you write down a number. Okay. Now, oh, no, add some zeros to that number, because it's 1.54 quadrillion molecules of a millionth of a gram of LSD. Okay. So that's enough.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. Hey, everyone. I'm an LCSW in Maryland. Ideally, I would like to incorporate psilocybin use into my clinical work during parts work to treat extreme depression. How far are we from having this as a legal treatment modality?
Welcome to the United States.
Rub your crystal ball, Jim. Come on. When is it happening?
Yeah,
I'm going early 24 with Compass with psilocybin. What do you guys got?
Let us say that you better vote, because at least one of the parties seems to be open. You know, Biden just is setting up a psychedelic quote task force, which is government speak for we're going to actually put out some legislation. The other party, I think, is frightened by the whole notion of looking at consciousness. So the United States will not be the first. At the moment, Alberta, the state of Alberta, or the province of Alberta in Canada, is setting up the regulations so that people can do exactly what you're asking as a registered nurse, which is, what are the rules for giving psychedelics to individuals so that anyone in Alberta who has the correct licenses can do it.
We're voting on that in Colorado in November. Legal psilocybin, psilocin, mescaline, ibogaine, and DMT. It's going to be fascinating. A regulated frame for all of it.
And I would guess it goes much the same way that cannabis did, right? It started in Colorado and Oregon and Washington and California, and same with, decriminalization that's starting in Colorado and across Washington and California. So I definitely see it in the next couple of years for sure. Keep calling your senators and writing your congressmen and seeing what you can do. So
let me handle this next one, if you wouldn't mind. So this is effectively, how do I buy mushrooms? Because we're in America, I can't really tell you that. I can tell you the internet is your friend. There's plenty of websites where you can learn how to grow. I learned to grow from Mycotopia and Shroomery. There's a lot of easier places to learn to grow nowadays. So get out there. I think we're going to have some links in the Microdosing Masterclass too, for how to grow. But start going to meetups, and there's an amazing amount of consumer packaged goods now out there. Be careful though. A doctor handed me a microdose recently, and it certainly was not. So made for a fun dinner, but.
Right. Yeah. And I've been there too. I've been given what was a microdose that turned into a very uncomfortable large dose experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone. So if you are sourcing from somewhere, please, see what you can do to validate it, test it, whatever. We missed a question above. It says, I'm listening from Norway. What are your thoughts about microdosing with LSD or psilocybin for lowering anxiety or helping with depression? Just to answer this quickly, there are thousands of reports online of citizen scientists who are getting relief from both LSD and psilocybin for depression and anxiety. I know for myself, I moved out of the cannabis space 4 or 5 years ago when I saw how effective psilocybin microdosing was for my own depression. So I absolutely think it's something that has helped a lot of people.
Now, let's be clear that just anxiety is not the same thing. And the effects of just anxiety, we're not as sure. If it's depression, and almost everyone with depression has some anxiety because their life isn't working very well, that's fine. We have, again, hundreds and hundreds of reports. With anxiety, we have mixed reports, just anxiety. So thank you, Norway.
Awesome. If one was to microdose LSD or any psychedelic, is there a tolerance that occurs over time? Because I've personally noticed that a tolerance builds up. There is absolutely a tolerance that builds up. Early in the 1950s, they had already figured out that small microdoses of LSD built up a tolerance within 3 days in a row of the same dose. So they also found out 3 days off reduced the tolerance. So yes, effectively, if you're taking psychedelic in small or large doses, one after another, a tolerance will build up to eventually, if you were microdosing every day, it wouldn't be effective at all, I would believe. So yes, that's the importance of days off and protocols, which we'll dive more into in the masterclass.
Adam, you and I have to record something with Amanda Fielding about this, because her idea of microdosing is something else. And she, even on her off days, performed worse on her go days. And I think she was using daily for years and years and years.
Amanda,
calling it microdosing is...
Amanda Fielding and I, who adore each other, are very clear that I always recommend too low a dose and she always recommends too high a dose. And the nice thing about, again, as Adam has said, you can always take more.
You can always take more. You can never take less. I'm telling you, it's so important to remember. So next question I can answer quickly. Is it best to pulverize the entire mushroom? Are caps more potent than stems? And what is the usual dose to begin with? Usual dose to begin with, 50 to 100 milligrams. Yes, it's best to blend up or pulverize the mushroom. I believe it helps with the digestion in your gut. And are caps more potent than stems? We don't really know, but recent analysis has shown they're pretty equal. So this idea that, one is more important is we don't know, but the idea with that, you would homogenize it all, blend it all together, and you wouldn't really know what you were putting in. So moving on from that, I'm listening from Indiana. I've experienced great benefit from microdosing psilocybin. I'm curious about microdosing Amanita muscaria, but I can't find many resources. With proper identification and prep, can this be beneficial in helping depression and anxiety?
Let's say we cover that in the class.
Yeah.
There's a robust microdosing scene, I'll say that.
Yeah, that's a deep question. And yes, there is a robust Amanita muscaria scene. It is legal. That's the difference between the Amanita muscaria mushroom and psilocybin is you don't have the risk of it being illegal. So
the other side of Amanita, very important, high dose, toxic, not nice, toxic. In microdose, remarkable. So get some information, go to the class, learn what you can before you try Amanita.
I'll do some research and report back as well. So awesome. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Sebastian from Santiago, Chile. My question is about breaking changing protocol parameters during sometime experiencing microdosing LSD. For example, I'm trying to understand and overcome social anxiety, so I decided to take a double microdose, 20 micrograms in between my every 3-day 10 microgram microdose, because I identified a relevant opportunity to explore this issue in a major social situation, which occasionally caused me anxiety. What do you think about modifying the dose and timing during an already set protocol? Jim, what do you think?
If it worked for you, it's fine. I wouldn't have done it. I'm very conservative. Basically, you're just throwing a big dose into the middle of smaller doses. Anxiety is particularly tricky. Social anxiety is, by the way, different than general anxiety and responds very well to microdosing without pushing a higher dose in. So if it worked, basically he was asking a question, he or she was asking a question, but they were also saying, I'd already done it. So my answer is, why don't you tell us rather than ask us to guess?
Yeah, if you want to share a story, we've got a community.psychedelicstoday.com. We'd love to hear about it and hope to see you in there.
Yeah.
So we got 3 minutes left and a gazillion questions left. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all these.
Can we run a little over?
I'm comfortable going a little further for sure.
Yeah, let's go a little over. We'll maybe just not drop in depth into all of them. If I can answer the question very quickly after I read it, I'll do so. If not, we're going to pass it over to Jim. And for the last 10 questions, we've already done 25. So if we don't get to you, I apologize. But please come check out the class. We really dive into all this in depth. You'll have the ability to directly email me questions if you have them, and we'll answer them. So
understand the reason for a class is because there's a lot of information. This is important. This can change your life. Don't blow it by saying, well, I found the instructions on the back of the matchbook and they're probably okay. It's not really that way.
And this next question really pulls us into why education in these classes are important. And it's basically the story of she's considered 200 to 500 milligrams of microdose. However, 200 is very distracting. Are there side effects part and parcel? Yes, absolutely. If I was working with you, I'd say your dose is way too high. And I would say part of the problem with current education on microdosing is they put the scale, in my opinion, above 300 milligrams, where for me, 250 to 300 milligrams is really starting a psychedelic experience. So that's part of what we're educating people on in this masterclass, is that microdosing is more 50 milligrams to 250 milligrams. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a small group of people with a high tolerance that might need more, but less seems to be more for most people. So I would think you need to lower your dose, Lauren, and that might help. Hello from Mexico. If microdosing mushrooms, is it more effective mixing psilocybin with other kinds of mushrooms? What I'd say quickly is lots of people love stacks. Paul Stamets is doing studies on his stacks. We'll discuss that. You have to try it yourself. Some people like niacin, some don't, some like stacks. So try it out yourself. I'm listening for Costa Rica, microdose for depression during the pandemic. It helped. I'm starting to hear in the plant medicine community about microdosing ayahuasca with or without DMT containing properties. What are your thoughts on this? My thoughts on this are guest teacher Laura Don answers all of your questions on microdosing ayahuasca in a 30-minute episode in the masterclass. So I recommend you checking it out there, because it is way too much information to give you in a minute, 2 minutes, or even 20 minutes. So, but Jim, you are seeing reports more and more about ayahuasca?
Just not ayahuasca, but just the Banisteriopsis or the vine. And there's a company called Soul of the Vine. They're on, they out of Los Angeles, and they sell just the Banisteriopsis, which is the non-psychedelic part of ayahuasca, and it seems to have a lot of benefits. Look it up.
And so that's what will really inform you, is that microdosing ayahuasca, it's the Banisteriopsis caapi, right? It's not both plants mixed together. It's just the one. So it's important that you're educated before you go out and try to do these things yourself. Do the long-term effects of microdosing, do the long-term effects of microdosing differ from those of macrodosing in any reliable, significant way?
Yes. Does climbing Mount Everest, is that different from running around a track in the junior high school? Yes.
Yes, so it's very different. We want you to remember that
they're not better or worse, they're different.
Very different. Okay, I currently microdose with psilocybin using 3 days on, 2 day off schedule, and have been experimenting with dosage. Is there any benefit to having a slightly higher dose during one of the days, or should they just be the usual steady dose?
We don't know, but we've got enough thousands of people with steady doses. We tend to go for less if you're asking a question. In general, the answer is try it with less and see how it works.
So I would say stay with the steady dose as well, especially if it's working for you. Don't mess with something that's working for you. Would microdosing mushrooms be ineffective if I'm currently taking XR benzos daily?
they will not be as effective, but they will help you get off the benzos if that's your intention.
And hey, if you're tapering medications or anything like that, it's really beneficial to contact your doctor and to get a tapering schedule from your doctor to let them know you're tapering. And then to, maybe even contact a coach like myself or somebody that has experience in tapering certain medicines and can set you up on a proper protocol. Because again, if you taper too fast, it's awful. And you experience the side effects that the medication was first trying to keep you away from. Joe, did you want to say something?
If you're tapering, always have supervision. It's one of the most dangerous parts of psychiatric meds is the taper.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you. A small percentage, 3 to 5% of my clients, hundreds, are significantly more sensitive. They have full-blown, short-lived 1 to 3 hour trips from 200 milligrams of encapsulated powder, even on a full stomach. What factors contribute to an individual's sensitivity?
Oh my, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to know? The point is, if they could take less and get the same benefit. Remember, less is always try for less and see how that works. So you have a normal range of clients, which includes people for whom taking too much, they notice it.
And I would say, just from reading your question, 200 milligrams is too high of a dose. Your clients might be taking too high of a microdose. I would put them on 100 milligrams. And I would believe that the reason your clients are having such an experience of feelings is their dose is too high. So I would reduce that dose. What about people with current long-term antidepressant history? I work with a lot of people, 20 years of antidepressant use. What I want to remind you is tapering is the hardest thing on the planet. Like Joe said, it's very challenging. So you need support, whether it's a doctor, a coach, a therapist, someone who's doing it. We're going to talk in depth about tapering and antidepressants and microdosing in the class. So please sign up and join us. We've got Maya here from Beirut, Lebanon. Is microdosing safe and effective in those diagnosed with bipolar? Since regular doses of psychedelics are relative contraindications, what about their use in autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis? So let's just answer bipolar, Jim. What about microdosing and bipolar in 30 seconds or less?
According to the bipolar community, don't take it during the manic phase. It is okay to microdose during the depressed phase.
Okay, that's according to the bipolar community online. Thank you, Jim.
We had a great podcast with Benjamin Mudge. Check that one out. Very similar topic.
Beautiful. What are the major differences between microdosing and macrodosing, and how can we measure a dosage from a live shroom? So we'll talk about the major differences in the class. They're very, very different. We'll also talk about measurement, how to get the proper scale, weighing out in milligrams, all of that. So we'll do that in greater length. Hope to see you in the class.
Right.
So following up on psilocybin, have there been any research on the effect of supporting alkaloids found naturally in the mushroom?
There's almost no research on the other alkaloids, but so far they don't seem to have any negative effects.
Okay. Hello from Norway. What are your thoughts about microdosing LSD, psilocybin, mescaline in order to help you recover from addiction to drugs? I've heard of people microdosing mescaline in order to help themselves get through the days without the same need for the drugs. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah. Adam will talk about some of his clients who've been addicted and are not addicted now.
We have a whole subsection on microdosing and addiction. A lot of people report that microdosing acts as an addiction disruptor. So in my clientele, it's been extremely helpful for opiate addiction, alcohol addiction, tobacco cessation, specifically antidepressants, you name it. So yeah, please join the class. We've got more research on all of that in depth there. What do you say to the people in academia that say microdosing psychedelics has not been shown to show any positive mental health effects? I believe they say this because of lack of randomized controlled trials.
Those researchers have their data and other people have other research data, and citizen science has thousands and thousands of reports. It's hard to say, it's kind of what do you want to believe? I believe that they can't find the improvements, and the reason that there are so many of you on this broadcast is because you think there are improvements and you're trying to work it out. I agree with you, and I have 12 years of experience that seems to be that way.
Awesome. Here's a pointed one. Is Dr. Fadiman willing to acknowledge the various conflicts of interest held by many of today's microdosing researchers? The majority of researchers in pulse damage studies are financially involved in a market that would benefit from the mainstreaming of microdosing.
Heavens. Heavens. You mean the people who are devoting time, energy, and money might benefit personally if the culture were made healthier and saner by their work? You bet. And what the question behind that is a lovely article I just recently read, that all the psychedelic research is about greed. And the answer is not all of it. And yes, there's a lot of terrible, ugly, normal pharmacological greed money pushing into psychedelics. Yes, big, sorry to make it, the 60s, we were all very pure because no one had any money, and then everything became illegal. So nobody had any problem with capitalism. Capitalism may not be the best model for better mental health.
Are there contraindications for microdosing related to having a pacemaker or having a shunt in the brain due to normal pressure hydrocephalus? Yep. HYDROCEPHALUS.
Hydrocephalic, yeah. We don't know, except now I know one person with a pacemaker who has used psychedelics, who's used microdosing on and off for about 12 years. So far, so good. And his cardiologist says he's doing very well.
Can we speak to that cardiac risk concept real quick?
Oh.
I'm sure you've talked about it far too much in your past.
There's a rumor out there that there's a very rare condition that might happen if you took microdosing for a long, long time. Because it's a rare condition, there's never been a case. There's also never been a case with high doses, and there are people who've taken high doses hundreds and hundreds of times. So at the moment, we have no evidence, and it's some curious speculation, and the various people who speculate kind of use different guesses, saying, if psilocybin were like ephedrine, which it's not, ephedrine is bad for you, therefore maybe psychedelics are bad for you. The science is not very good, meaning the movement between things that might hurt you and microdosing. It's a very, very long bridge, and so far nobody's walked on it.
If Amanda Fielding's fine and the Deadheads are fine, that's where I go.
Actually, that's a good one, right? If someone for Amanda who's taken psychedelics for 40 or 50 years and is as sharp as a tack, maybe it's okay, but maybe it's only okay for elderly British women. We don't know.
Well, we talk about Albert Hoffman in length in the class and how he lived to 102 and how he loved microdosing in his last years. Jim, you talk about it as well, and how, I've heard stories of children, Jerry Garcia's daughter receiving 2,000 hits as a young child and, surviving to this day as a very skilled and intelligent person. So a lot to learn. We have that in the class. We're down to our last 3 questions. I've had a high dose experience with psilocybin and 150 microgram experience with LSD. I've also done holotropic breathwork sessions. In terms of these therapeutic processes, do you think they're similar? And if so, what are your thoughts? I myself believe both psychedelics and holotropic breathwork are part of the same paradigm.
Okay. Since you're the one who's had the experiences and you just told us you think they're the same, maybe you're right.
I think they're a little different. I've done a lot of both, but you're dealing with psyche. That's the fundamental thing. It's just a different pathway to psyche.
Remember, breath work was invented by the Groffs after they were not able to use LSD anymore. So they think there's some overlap.
I think I heard some stories recently that there might be some with LSD and the
not anymore.
I'm not going to say anything here, but
we're running out of time.
Okay, running out of time. Moving on. Jennifer says, I disagree with the idea that there isn't integration when microdosing. Absolutely disagree. It can help regular therapy just like big experiences can, but an integration coach can be different and excellent support for microdosing. Absolutely. I don't think we ever said that you shouldn't have intention when microdosing or a coach. So we agree with you.
I typed out a thing saying I feel like the microdosing process could be supported quite fine by a therapist, but it's helpful if they have training.
Yeah, therapists have told me that they love it when they have patients who are microdosing because the work goes faster.
And I can't tell you how many therapists reach out to me during the week and that want to work in tandem with myself educating and guiding their clients on microdosing, and then them doing that deep therapeutic work in therapy. So thank you. Is microdosing effective for cocaine and alcohol addiction? We continue to hear many citizen scientist reports that it's effective for all addiction, not really mattering what the substance is. Last two questions. I microdosed LSD standard dose for a short time and had some bladder sensitivity issues. Is this unusual? I am in my 60s. Another older friend had the same issues.
I don't know. It's a good question. We'll start to look for it. Bladder sensitivity in people in their 60s and older is so common that it's very hard to distinguish, but maybe.
And I would say half your dose. See if you notice the bladder stuff.
Good.
That's what I think it is. I think a lot of the time people take way too much, especially with the LSD. That's what we'll talk about in depth in the course. It's really hard to dose LSD if you're not knowledgeable and doing it properly. And, just a little bit more than a microdose is going to heighten all your sensations, back pain, certain things. So that's what it could be. So moving on to our last one, are there any studies about microdosing for autism, Jim?
Yes. Autism on Acid. It's a book, and it's a book for sale. It's on Amazon. If you want it in anything other than a printed edition, he will send it to you. It goes to you for free. It's a brilliant guy who put it together about his own autism and his recovery. He's working now with the college in London on research for autism. They're doing a study. So we're working on it. And fortunately, the study is being guided by someone with enormous personal experience and, as you would not be surprised, great intelligence.
We've had him on the show. I just got to meet him again. I think I got to hang out with Aaron Orsini twice in the last month. Amazing gentleman.
Wonderful guy. Yeah.
So that's it. That's our presentation, everybody. Thanks for asking so many questions. Adam, what's the high level? What can we expect in the class?
We can expect probably the most comprehensive and in-depth look into the past ancestral evolutionary use, our connection to animals, our early use. We talk about the early microdosing research with LSD, the early days of Albert Hofmann, and we have a full hour of Jim Fadiman, in his own words, teaching you about microdosing and filling you in. On top of that, we've got Laura Dawn, Elizabeth Bass, I believe it's 12 guest faculty and teachers. Right now, tickets are on sale for $99. That $99 early bird price gets you access to more than 6 hours of information on microdosing for the lifetime, right? You get that forever. You can watch it over and over again, another speed. You will also get access to another live Q&A with Jim and I in case you have more questions at a later time once that class has launched. When the class launches November 15th, the price will jump up to $199. So again, this is your last opportunity to get it at half off. We hope you join, and we'd love to see you there.
Hooray.
Yeah, this is fantastic. And a link to the class is in the chat. You can find it at psychedeliceducationcenter.com, psychedelicstoday.com. Jim, Adam, this has been so much fun, and I really appreciate you both spending so much time with us.
Well, again, as I think Adam said it very nicely, serious, sophisticated, terrific, and genuine questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks for hanging out.